Kingfisher let out a high-pitched scream that would have done a woman justice. Then the tall, tan-complexioned man began to scramble toward the waiting car. He had to shove some of his bodyguards out of the way, but he managed to throw himself through the front door of the waiting Cadillac before the Ford reached them. Some of his gunmen, made out of better stuff, held their ground, pulling guns from under their coats. But the pistols were no match for the bursts from the submachine guns as the car roared past. All the bullets that struck the Cadillac bounced off because the car was bulletproof, but the men standing on the sidewalks weren't. They fell as if someone had cut them down with a mowing machine. Salutations and welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks. My name is Ralph Anthony Garcia, also known as R4. The legal, the loyal, the regal, the royal, Ronin Ralph, your master of ceremonies. I would like to take this moment to tell you folks thank you for joining me on Ralph Reads, and to please tell a friend to like, share, comment, and subscribe to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. On today's edition of Ralph Reads, I reintroduce AlCClark and his next novel in the Kenyatta miniseries, Death List. Copyrighted in 1974 by AlCClark. Copyright renewed 2002 by the children of Donald Goines. Let the reading commence. Chapter 1. The two detectives have been sitting in their office at the downtown police precinct since early morning, waiting for one phone call. When the telephone finally rang, both men leapt to their feet. The black officer beat his white partner to the phone. He winked at his friend, letting him know that this was the call they had been waiting for. The tall, chisel-faced white man walked back to his old beat-up desk and sat down. Detective Ryan drummed his fingers on the top of the well-scarred desk as he waited impatiently for the call to come to an end. Finally, the tall black man hung up the phone. "Well, what the hell are you going to do?" he yelled over to his partner as Ryan jumped to his feet. "Sit there on your dead ass all day?" "Screw you, Benson, you cocksucker, you!" Ryan yelled back as both men moved hurriedly towards the door. "Did the informer give up all the information we need?" Detective Edward Benson slowed down enough to show Ryan a piece of paper on which he had hurriedly written down an address. "We've got the bastard's address, just like he said he'd get." The two men walked hurriedly down a short corridor that led them into an outer office. The detectives threaded their way through the cluttered office, greeting the men and women over the hum of the old-fashioned air conditioner. As the black and white detectives neared the outer door, two younger detectives sitting nearby came to their feet. Neither man appeared to be over 25 years old, while Ben and Ryan both had wrinkles under their eyes that were not there from lack of sleep. Both of the older detectives appeared to be in their late 30s or early 40s. They were replicas of what the younger men would look like in 10 years if they stayed on their jobs as crime fighters. The work would take its toll. The two young white detectives ignored Benson and spoke to his partner. It was done more out of habit than to slight Benson deliberately.
"We were told to wait for you, sir, that you might need backup men,"
the taller of the two said. Ryan stopped and stared at the men. He hadn't missed a slur to his black partner. "I don't know," Ryan answered harshly. "It's up to my senior officer, Detective Benson." He nodded in the direction of the black officer. The two young white detectives glanced down at the floor in embarrassment. Neither man wanted to come out and ask Benson directly if they could go along, but it would be a good point on their record if they could be in on the arrest of 2 murderers. "What do you think, Ben?" Ryan asked his partner, breaking the silence. Benson glanced coldly at the 2 younger officers. "It's up to you, Ryan, if you think you might need some help arresting the punks." He shrugged his shoulders, showing his actions that he really didn't want the men along. Ryan knew what the problem was. If the men had spoken to Benson when they first walked up, he would have taken them along gladly. But now he didn't want to be bothered with them. It was written all over his face. In the years Ryan had worked with him, he had come to find that the intelligent black man was extremely sensitive. At times, it seemed as if he was too sensitive. Ryan started to tell the young man to come along anyway, but changed his mind. There was no sense in antagonizing the man he had to work with. As Benson went out the door, Ryan turned to the 2 men sheepishly. "Well, I guess there won't be any need for your help after all. It shouldn't take 4 of us to bring in 2 punks." It was apparent that the 2 men were disappointed. One of them started to say something but decided against it. Their brief exchange hadn't gone unnoticed by some of the other officers in the department. Most of them had been aware of what the men had been waiting for. As Ryan went out the door, leaving the men behind, the workers in the office glanced down, not wanting to catch the eyes of the rejected men. Ryan caught up with his partner in the garage underneath the station. This was where they brought their prisoners. They took them out of the car, still handcuffed, and led them to the 3 elevators that were located in the center of the garage. No matter where a policeman parked, he didn't have to go far to transport his prisoner. There were 2 uniformed policemen stationed in the garage at all times to help if help was ever needed. The garage was also a good place for the policemen to kick the shit out of the prisoners out of sight of any watching eyes. The garage detail never went against another officer, no matter how brutally a policeman might treat a handcuffed prisoner. "You could have brought those guys along, Ryan," Benson said, drumming his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. Ryan shook his head as Benson drove out of the garage. "Nah, Ben, it's like you said. What the hell do we need with help? It ain't but 2 punks that we're after." Benson knew Ryan was lying, as well as he knew he had been wrong in rejecting the help of the fellow officers. They were on their way to arrest Billy Good and his partner, Jackie Walker. Both men were believed to be professional killers. In such a case, there should be backup men on the job. If something should happen to Ryan because of Benson's anger, he would never get over it. But as he picked up the 2-way radio and put in a call, given the address they were headed for and requested the support of a black and white car, Benson got a feeling of satisfaction. He knew that the 2 younger detectives would hear about it and know they had been rejected, while 2 uniformed men had been called in to do what they had been refused the honor of doing. Ryan only glanced straight ahead. He knew what his partner had done and realized that it was another blow to the pride of the younger officers. As it was, Benson wasn't the most liked officer in the homicide division, and after this got out, which it would, he would be liked even less. "You think these guys will give us any trouble?" Ryan asked as they left the freeway at Clay Avenue and made a left turn. Benson gave a standard shrug. "I haven't thought about it one way or the other. I could care less either way," he answered coldly. Even as the policemen got off the freeway, 8 blocks from their destination, events were taking place that would change their lives. Billy Good was parking the car in front of his and Jackie's apartment. Jackie kissed his girlfriend, Carol, one more time before getting out. They had just come from Kenyatta's farm, where they had been staying for the past week. Ever since making the hit on Kingfisher's dope pusher, Little David, they'd been out of town. Billy, who had driven the whole way back from the farm, stretched his arms out, then caressed Joy's neck. The tall black beauty riding next to him smiled contentedly. Joy had finally found a man she could really love. This short, husky, brown-skinned man wasn't what she dreamed her lover man would look like, but he'd proven he was more than adequate. She had no apprehensions when she was with him. It was a new and gratifying experience for her. The men she'd had in the past had always depended on her, mostly for an income. Now she had a man who wasn't concerned with how much money she could make. He just wanted her for herself. This was the first time Joy had ever been to the apartment that Billy shared with Jackie. She had just met Billy when Kenyatta brought him and Jackie out to the farm and had given a party in their honor. She smiled to herself smugly as she remembered that first night in Billy's arms. What a night it had been! They'd made love till dawn, and then she couldn't really sleep, afraid that when she woke, it would all have been a dream. Carol and Jackie got out of the car first and waited on the pavement for Billy to come around the car and join them. They made a curious couple, him being over 6'5", while she was only 5 foot. Billy came around the car grinning. Neither of the two couples paid much attention to the well-dressed men who got out of the black Cadillac down the street and hurried toward them. The first warning came when the men had gotten close and Jackie noticed one of them open up his suit coat and take out what looked like a short iron pipe. Before he could react, he realized that it was a sawed-off shotgun. He screamed out in panic, "Watch out, Billy! They got shotguns!" The sound of his voice hadn't died out before the afternoon quiet was shattered by the sounds of shotguns going off. Joy had been admiring the new home she was going to move into when she was struck down. Half of her neck was blown off. Billy was spattered with the blood of his loved one. He screamed, a dying scream full of hate and frustration as he made a frantic move for his shoulder holster. Unknown strength kept him on his feet as the first shotgun shells hit him high in the chest. He fell back against the car, somehow managing to remove the gun from its place of concealment. But it was no use. He died with the weapon still in his hand. Carol's screams shattered the stillness as she watched Jackie topple over, his tall frame crumbling as he kept falling until the hard pavement struck him in the face. Her screams were cut off abruptly as half her mouth and face were blown away. She was dead before she hit the cold ground. Black faces peered out of the windows of the nearby buildings, but no one came to the rescue of the stricken couples. Blood ran freely down off the sidewalk into the gutter as the lifeless forms of 4 young black people lay in the filth and hopelessness of the hard-pressed neighborhood. Down the street, the long black Cadillac moved away from the curb, filled with black men who made killing their business. Even as detectives Benson and Ryan turned onto the street, the black car disappeared around the corner. Benson slammed on his brakes next to the murder scene. The black and white backup car came from the opposite end of the street, having turned the same corner that the black Cadillac had. Benson walked from one body to the next, examining the dead. When he reached Jackie's long body, he thought he heard a moan, but there was so much blood he believed it must have been his imagination. He bent down and lifted up the bloody head, cradling Jackie in his arms as if he were her loved one. "I think this one's still with us!" he yelled out as Ryan came over. Ryan flinched at the sight. He had seen many murders before, but whenever he came upon a shotgun killing, it was always horrible. This one was even worse than most. It was the first time he'd ever seen women shot down in such a vicious manner. Ryan stood over his partner and called out to one of the uniformed officers who was running over with a gun in his hand. Call for an ambulance! He ordered sharply, his voice cracking with emotion. As Ryan glanced around at the other uniformed policemen, he saw the young black officer bent over by the car throwing up his afternoon meal. The sight of the man puking almost made Ryan do the same thing. Benson stood up. He can change that call. We don't need an ambulance. What we need now is a meat wagon. He walked away, unaware of the blood that was on his new blue suit. Chapter 2. The private office in the rear of Kenyatta's club was crowded with members. Ali had brought most of the main people in from the farm, and they were all trying to get in the rear office. The front of the club was full of the less important members of the organization. All of the talk floating around was about the killing of Billy and Joy, with little mention of Jackie and Carol. Joy and Billy were the better known of the four people. As they talked about the killings, the young people in the crowd couldn't really believe what had happened, or didn't want to. The men spoke in loud voices about retaliation and the punishment that Kenyatta would dish out for the wrong done to them. Even though Billy and Jackie hadn't been members, their women had been. And Joy was related to Kenyatta's lady, Betty, so they knew something would be done. Even as they whispered about it, Kenyatta paced up and down his office. It has to be an act of retaliation, Ali, Kenyatta stated, stopping in front of the tall, bald-headed man. No matter how I look at this shit, it comes up the same way. That motherfucking nigga Kane Fisher is behind this crap. I'll bet my front seat in hell, man, that he put out the contract on Billy and them because of that little pusher nigga, little David, getting hit. Betty got up from the hard back and wooden chair she had been sitting in at the rear of the office. The stately, beautiful woman walked up to her man and stopped.
But why, honey? Why did they kill Joy? She didn't have anything to do with the killing of little David. She wasn't even in the city at the time.
Tears were running down her cheeks as she talked.
I can't get it out of my mind that it was my fault that Joy got killed.
Hold on, baby, Kenyatta said softly, taking the girl's arm and drawing her near. He held her tight in his arms and stroked her hair tenderly. Get them kind of thoughts out of your mind, he said as he gently led her toward his large chair behind the desk.
It's true though, Ken,
she continued.
If I hadn't introduced her to Billy, it would have never happened. She wouldn't have been with him when he came back to town, so she wouldn't have gotten killed.
Honey, Kenyatta whispered, you can't think like that. The way them two fell in love with each other, it couldn't have went any other way. I mean, they would have met anyway. He stayed out on the farm after we left, so they would have come in contact with each other no matter what you did. Before she could speak, he continued, looking at it that way, Betty, you can hold me responsible for their deaths. Because if I hadn't given the party for them, none of this would have jumped off. Betty stared up at the tall black man she loved. She gained strength from him, and at that moment she needed all the strength she could get. His words took her doubts and fears away. She allowed him to sit her down in his chair.
When you talk, honey, it all makes sense, but when I get to thinking by myself, I keep seeing myself as the reason why she's dead.
Well, don't think then, Kenyatta stated, ignoring the rest of the people in the office. He was tired of the crowd of people anyway, but he didn't want to dismiss them. He was going to need some of them as soon as some information came in, so he just had to put up with the crowd for a while. He's sure telling you right, Mama, Ali said as he reached over on the desk and picked up one of Kenyatta's cigarettes. The way them two carried on, it was just in the cards, that's all. She glanced at the two men. They were so much alike, not just for the fact that they were both bald-headed either. Both were tall black men, but whereas Kenyatta wore a beard and heavy mustache, Ali wore only a trimmed mustache. Ali was slightly taller than Kenyatta too, though both men towered over 6 feet. Kenyatta raised his hands for quiet, then spoke to the group in his office. Fellows, you and the few ladies in here, I want you people to go upstairs or into the outer office until Ali and I can get something together. It's not that I ain't got faith in all you brothers and sisters, nor am I holding any secrets from you. But it's just that there's too many people in here right now. We can't even hear ourselves think. So you go upstairs and have fun. I'll call the ones I want. He waited until most of the people filed out of the door. Betty started to leave, but Kenyatta waved her back down in the chair. I'll tell you what you can do, Betty. Fix me and Ali a good cold drink, okay? Then come on back down. She smiled at him as she got up to do as he requested. Both men watched the tall, attractive black woman as she walked across the office floor. The thick, dark brown carpet smothered the sound of her high-heeled shoes, but nothing could disguise her large, beautiful black thighs, revealed to the eye by the miniskirt she wore. The tiny red skirt bounced up behind her with each step she took, causing Ali to give her a long, admiring glance. Both men remained silent until the door closed behind Betty. She was the last person to leave the office. Ali let out a short whistle. I got to admit, she sure is a looker. It seemed as if Kenyatta hadn't even heard his remark. The dark, handsome man walked to the rear of the office and stared out the window. He didn't bother to speak for a few minutes. Ali, it's like I said, ain't but one person responsible for this mess, and that motherfucker's King Fisher. I want him. I want him so bad I can taste it. That nigga is to blame for over half the dope that comes into the ghetto, Ali. Over half the fucking poison that finds its way into those dumbass addicts' veins. Ali was used to his partner's ways, so he just remained silent and waited. We, Kenyatta began softly, were supposed to have knocked off that food stamp place. That's what Billy came back to town for. I called him and told him to get his ass on back here if he wanted in on the stick-up. He stopped as if deep in thought, then added, then them niggas shot him down. He must have pulled up in front of their apartment where the motherfuckers cut them down. There were actually tears in Kenyatta's eyes as he talked. Ali glanced away so that Kenyatta wouldn't realize that he had seen them. Ali knew that the killing of their friends had hit Kenyatta hard, but he hadn't figured it had hit him that hard. Actually, Ali could take it in stride. So a couple of gunmen and their broads had got knocked off. Those things happened when you played in the big leagues. I got a call, Ali, Kenyatta began, changing the subject. From my white boy, who's getting that list for us. He's got it, and now all we need is the cash I promised him for it. That was something else Ali didn't agree with. Paying out all that money for a list of dope dealers just didn't make sense, even if they were the largest dealers in the city. The thought of $10,000 going out for a piece of paper with names on it was just too much for Ali to understand. He wished at times that he was the leader. Then he'd run the organization differently. While it was a good idea preaching about knocking off the dope pushers, it would pay even better if they just made the pushers pay them protection. But Kenyatta wouldn't hear of anything like that. He was really sincere when he preached that shit about cleaning up the ghettos. If he wasn't, he wouldn't be wasting time killing police who came down on the brothers. Anytime they got a report about any nigger-hating cop, Kenyatta started planning on sending the cop to hell. You still planning on paying that Wood all that money for that list, Kenyatta? Ain't nothing changed. Why should I? Kenyatta turned away from the window. You ain't never been able to accept the idea of putting out all that bread for them names, have you? He waited, then continued before Ali could answer. I don't see why it's so hard for you to understand. Ali, the first time we knock off a pusher, we ought to be able to pick up more cash that I'm sending out for the list. Man, all these motherfuckers on the list are big. And do I mean big? They are the bastards that supply the dope to the whole damn city, Ali. They ain't just neighborhood pushers, man. They're what you would call international dope men. Just about every name on the list will be a whitey, baby, so you can imagine the kind of dough they should have around their pads. For a minute, the men's eyes met in the clash of wills. Finally, Ali had to glance down at the rug. There was something fanatical in Kenyatta's eyes. It occurred to him that the man was mad. Yeah, man, what you say sounds good, Ali began. But it might just be a little more difficult than when you think. Them honkies have got guards all over the fucking place. If they were easy to knock off, somebody would have knocked them off before now. That's the goddamn problem with black men, Kenyatta stated coldly. You big-ass bad brothers are always ready to step in and knock off another black man who's dealing. But when it comes to stepping on them Beckerwood's toes, you start shitting in your pants. Kenyatta walked over to Ali and looked straight into his eyes. I know damn near what you think before you think it, Ali, and don't you ever forget it. I know you just love to be number one in this outfit, but it wouldn't work. They wouldn't follow you for 10 minutes. You think small, and you'll always be small. Kenyatta raised his voice. If you think I'm lying, just look in the mirror. When I mention knocking off them rich honkies, your face damn near turned red. And that's one hell of a trick for a black-ass nigger like you. For the second time in less than 10 minutes, Ali found himself unable to look into Kenyatta's eyes. This time, it was for a different reason. He stared down at the rug, ashamed of what he felt. It ain't like that at all, Kenyatta. I'm just looking at facts, man. Them honkies you talking about ain't gonna be easy to reach. They don't even allow a black face out in them neighborhoods, and that's why I'm saying we don't stand a chance of knocking them Woods off. Niggers walk into banks and knock them off every motherfucking day, Ali. So why the fuck should it be too different for a black man to figure out a way to knock off some goddamn Peckerwood just because he lives in a neighborhood that don't want any black people moving in? We got a few light-skinned black people in our organization, so when the time comes to stick up one of them places, we'll just use a few of them. There was a slight knock on the door, and Betty came in carrying their drinks on a tray. The men accepted them in silence. She turned to leave, but Kenyatta stopped her. Wait, honey, this may interest you, he stated, opening the desk drawer. I wanted to knock the stamp place off on the 1st of the month, but since it's past, we'll just have to be happy with what we can get on the weekend take. He spread some blueprints out on the desk. This is the layout of the joint. We'll send some people over to knock it off tomorrow. Ali opened his mouth in surprise. This was the reason that people followed Kenyatta. When he made up his mind to do something, it was always done right. Chapter 3. The armored transport driver cursed as he pulled up in front of the food stamp collection agency on Grand River Avenue. A tall black woman stood in front of a car with the hood up. She watched the driver closely as he pulled into a parking space 2 cars ahead of hers. As soon as the truck was parked and the two guards got out, the tall woman slammed the hood of the car down. She seated herself in the car and watched the heavily armed guards as they entered the agency. Inside the building, a crowd of people seemed to be milling around, but as one's eyes became accustomed to the darkness, one realized that they were actually standing in separate lines. At the front of each line was a window with a teller behind it. There were bars over each window except at the bottom, where there was a large enough space for a man or woman to crawl through. There was one security guard in the building, and when the two transport guards entered, he joined them. There was a small wooden gate that led through to the other side of the windows where the woman tellers worked. The guards joked with the black security guard as the trio went into the rear. The manager came out of his office and joined them. They began at the cage farthest from the entrance door. The woman in the cage had to unlock her door from inside to allow the men to enter. Inside it was like a small cabinet filled with shelves overlapping the small steel safe that contained the money. As each customer bought food stamps, the money was put into an envelope, sealed, and dropped into the safe, where it remained until the transport men picked it up twice a week. As the manager stepped into the small cage, he removed a large key ring and inserted a key into the lock. Next, the guard stepped up and inserted his key. At this point, the door swung open. Quickly, the guard stuffed the money into the bag that his partner held. It didn't take long before the small safe was empty. They moved quickly to the next cage and followed the same procedure. Finally, they reached the last one. By the time the last safe had been emptied, the guards had filled 3 money bags. Sweat stood out on the forehead of the guard with the key. He was a large, red-faced man with heavy jowls, ill-fitting clothes, and a huge potbelly. "God damn this heat!" he cursed, not worrying about his profanity in front of the black female worker. The fat white manager grinned at him as they worked. They were two of a kind. "I wish I can offer you a drink knowing how it is," the manager said as they stepped back from the cage. From out of nowhere, a black man appeared in the section behind the cages. Before anyone could react to his appearance, another one appeared at his side. Both men wore long 3/4-length summer coats. As the stunned group of guards stared at them, the men brushed back their coats and presented the sawed-off shotguns they held in their hands. "What the goddamn hell are you guys trying to pull?" the manager yelled angrily. There was fear in the manager's face, but overriding that fear was anger. He became a bright red as the blood rushed to his face. "I won't stand still for it!" the manager yelled. Instead of useless curse words, the heavy-set transport guard went into action. He couldn't allow a stick-up. It would go on his record, a mark he didn't want, and one he wouldn't have. In 20 years as a guard, he had never had any money taken from him. They had attempted to 5 years ago, 3 young black boys, but he and his partner had handled it. They had killed 2 of the kids and wounded a 3rd one. He remembered the newspapers and all the publicity. For a few days, he had been a hero to the public and his every word publicized. Those very thoughts were running through his mind when he made his foolish move. He fell to one side, trying to make that fast draw he had practiced so much. He never got his huge pistol out of the holster. A 3rd black man in the front of the group stepped forward, raised the short-barreled shotgun an inch, and pulled the trigger. The distance between them was less than 6 feet. The shot nearly cut the guard in half. It lifted him up off his feet and blew him back almost the length of the room. The 2nd guard didn't fare any better. He made his move at just about the same time his partner made his. The 2nd black man in the group shot him, and the shot hit him in the face. Blood flew everywhere. Where there had been a nose and eyes, there were only gaping holes. It should have been enough, but it wasn't. Whether or not the black security guard acted out of fear or the desire to be a hero would never be known. He tried to clear leather with his pistol, but only managed to join the other men on the floor. He clutched at his stomach, trying to hold in his guts, which were pouring out of a huge hole in his stomach. Whether or not he realized what was about to happen, the manager began to back up, pleading with each step he took. "Take the money! Take it all! But please don't hurt me! See?" He raised his hands high in the air. "I'm unarmed! You guys have nothing to fear from me! See?" He stretched his arms even higher in the air. As he begged, one of the black men in the rear ran past the other men towards the back of the building. He returned almost instantly. "It takes a key to open it!" he yelled. Screams of fear came from the crowd of predominantly black people in the front of the building. The black man standing in the front door holding a shotgun on them was beginning to have trouble from some of the fear-ridden women. "Stay back!" he yelled loudly at them. The sounds of the shooting had just about driven them mad with fear. They pushed and shoved from the rear until those in front were forced to move. The gunman made up his mind at once. He didn't want to shoot any innocent people down, so he stepped aside. "Okay," he yelled out, "get the hell on!" The stampede began. The women ran out the door, fighting each other in their haste to get away. Some of them weren't so lucky. The old ones were knocked to the floor, then trampled by the frightened women behind them. Then someone shoved a terrified woman aside. The woman fell across the small counter-like shelf that kept the people away from the window. Others followed her until there was a jammed-up group inches away from the glass. Another gunshot went off, causing more bedlam, and this time the people nearest the glass couldn't push back hard enough. The ones in front went through the plate glass. Everyone was screaming in terror. "We need the key that opens the back door!" one of the hold-up men yelled at the manager. Here it is!" the frightened man yelled, snatching the ring loose from the small keychain. "Take it!" He tossed it in their direction. One of the men snatched up the keys and ran towards the door. The other bandit grabbed up the money bags and ran after him. The third stick-up man was undecided. He kept his gun on the manager until the fourth man reached him. "Watch him a second," he ordered, then ran to the rear of the building. The fourth bandit, who had been holding the crowd back from the front door, glanced down at the dead bodies lying on the floor. "Shit!" he cursed, raising his weapon towards the manager. The manager saw his own death in the man's cold black eyes. "Please," he begged, "please, I got a wife and..." The blast of the sawed-off shotgun was muffled by the cries of the women. The female tellers were crouching in their cages, screaming at the death around them. Pain exploded from the manager's chest. He staggered from the force of the blow that struck him, but it didn't knock him off his feet. He could feel the pain, even as the enveloping blackness prevented him from screaming out like the women. The blood-spattered wall held him up for a time, but the last remaining strength in his legs gave out, and he crumpled up and slid to the floor. As the murderer ran after his partners, the women inside the cages got up off the floor and fled. They were afraid the killers might come back. Before the killer could reach the back door, he met the man who had ordered him to stay. "What did you do with the manager?" he asked quickly. "I killed him," came the frank answer. "Come on then, we've got the back door open," he stated, turning to lead the way. The man ran past him. Now there was only fear in the killer's hearts. "Shake the lead out of your ass, Red!" the man yelled back over his shoulder. "The fucking police will be all over this joint in a minute!" The man called Red didn't answer, but just followed on the fleeing man's heels. When they reached the alley, the same car that had been stalled in front of the building was waiting. Betty sat behind the steering wheel impatiently. She gunned the motor as the last of the men came out. They had hardly jumped in before she had the car in motion and was pulling away. The gravel in the alley flying from under the speeding car's wheels was the only sound heard inside the car as they made their getaway. The alley ended where another alley crossed. This was where Betty made her turn, taking a left. There was clear driving down the long, empty alleyway. Betty slowed down slightly and drove at a more moderate pace. As they passed a vacant garage, two boys came out and put 4 garbage cans across the alley. If there was any pursuit, the occupants of the following cars would have to get out and clear away the cans. Betty smiled to herself as she watched them disappear in her mirror. Kenyatta thought of everything, she reflected, as she drove even slower. That slight glimpse of the boys protecting their rear filled her with a confidence she hadn't had earlier. When she had first heard the gunshots going off inside the building, her first thought had been of fleeing. She had a hard time fighting down the desire to leave. They must have gotten busted inside. What other reason for all the shooting, she'd asked herself. She came to an end of the alley and stopped. She glanced both ways before pulling out into the traffic. When they reached the next intersection, a police car came flying past, heading for Grand River Avenue. She waited for the speeding police car to cross in front of them. "They must be on code 3, someone said from the back seat. The sound of his voice breaking the silence also helped break the tension. The rest of the people in the car cracked up laughing. "Well, goddamn, Eddie B," Red said, holding his side. "Leave it up to you, man, and you'll make a funny on your way to hell." The slim, brown-skinned man called Eddie B smiled slightly. It made him feel good to make people laugh. It was one of the few things he really enjoyed in life, trying to be a comic. Betty glanced over at Red sitting in the front seat next to her.
"How did everything go?"
she asked quietly.
"You know, I heard all that damn shooting, so I'm sure as hell curious about it."
"I'll just bet your ass is," Red replied. "It's enough to make you curious." He stopped and twisted around in the car seat. "Our boy Zeke here started the ball to rolling," he began. "The fool-ass guard tried to go for his gun, and Zeke sent him to see his maker." The tall, slim, brown-skinned Negro sitting by the rear window moved nervously in his seat. "Look here, brother," he began, speaking slowly. "I don't mind Betty knowing about it because she was up on the robbery with us. But after this, let's do not any mentioning of who shot who, okay?" he said seriously. "I know I ain't got nothing to worry about because all of us just about killed somebody back there. But I'm talking about when we get back to our club, let's not speak of who shot who." "I'll go along with that," the short, plump man sitting between Eddie B and Zeke stated. "There was too much bloodshed back there for us to talk about it. Them kinds of things are best left untalked about." "Don't worry, Charles," Red said casually. "Even though everybody in our club is cool, it is better not to talk about it. I'd even go as far as to say don't even mention that you were on the job. Just being up on it is enough to get all day in prison." Everybody in the car agreed with Red. Robert, the man who had run past Red so fast, gave a short laugh. "Shit, Red, as slow as you were moving, I'd have thought you kinda wanted to get cracked out. You know what they say, once a guy spent so much time in Jackson as you have, he becomes institutionalized to such a degree that he really misses that way of life." Red laughed along with the rest of the people. Nah, baby, but having a foot race with you to see who got out first wouldn't have been cool either. Just like your running past me wasn't the coolest thing in the world. Robert started to argue, but Red cut him off. Kenyatta asked me to be in charge to a certain degree, so I felt it was my duty to see that everything went off right. You ain't forgot, have you, Robert, that I was on my way back in just to get you? For just a minute, Robert looked around sheepishly, then he regained his bravado. Yeah, I know you were, but you ain't forgot either that you ordered me to stay there to the last and watch that fat-ass banker. God damn it, Charles cried out. I meant to put a slug or two into his fat ass. I hate a whitey who looks like that bastard. I mean, you can actually tell he's a funky motherfucker on a black nigga's ass. Well, you don't have to worry about him no more. That's one honky that won't be giving out any more orders unless it's in hell. Betty turned onto a side street.
I hope you done put them guns and money inside those shopping bags,
she said as she pulled up beside a small compact car. Inside was a woman who looked as if she was white. The woman glanced up and down the street anxiously as Betty parked beside her.
Hi, Arlene,
Betty yelled as Red slipped out of the car and took the keys from Arlene. He went around and opened up the trunk of her car and put the shopping bags inside. When he came back, he removed the trunk key from the ring before giving the keys back to the woman.
Well, we'll be seeing you around, honey,
Betty called out sweetly as she pulled away. She watched in the mirror as Arlene drove off. Well, that takes care of that. Arlene is so light. If the police should stop her, she won't have no trouble because they'll think she's a white girl and let her go. That's sure enough cool. But what's cooler yet, Zeke said from the back, is that we ain't got that hot shit in the car with us no more. Amen, Robert said. You can sure as hell say amen to that. When Betty stopped at another intersection, the police car cruised past them slowly. The driver gave them the once-over, but seeing the woman driving must have thrown him off because he kept on going. I'll say amen, amen, loud and clear now, Red said, and they all laughed. They knew now that they could really relax. They were home clear. There was no more need to fear a bust. Everything had been taken care of. We have reached the end of this portion of the miniseries on Ralph Reads. I would like, or rather love, to thank you queens and kings, fellow royalty, for stopping by. You may connect with me via Facebook, send a friend request to Ralph Anthony Garcia on Twitter and Instagram at rgmc2407. Send an email to rgmc2407@gmail.com, where if you would like to leave a small donation, please use the Zelle app or paypal.me/rgmc2407 or Cash App. My cash tag is rgmc2407. You may also connect with me on my other channel, the music channel, RGMC Ralph Garcia, Master of Ceremonies, and right here on TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you, and I love you like cooked food. I will see you on the next edition of this AlCClark miniseries on Ralph Reads. Stop while you're ahead or fall all the way behind.